In the vast expanse of the Andromeda Galaxy, where civilizations rise and fall like waves against cosmic shores, there exists a universal truth that every species learns too late. Never judge a warrior by the softness of their skin or the kindness in their eyes. The Zephyrian Empire had conquered 14 solar systems without breaking stride. Their crystalline ships carved through space like knives through silk, leaving behind nothing but surrendering worlds and broken defenses. They were the apex predators of their corner of the universe, beings of pure energy housed in bodies harder than diamond, with minds that calculated victory before the first shot was fired. So when their scouts reported a small, unremarkable planet inhabited by bipedal creatures made of soft flesh and fragile bone, the High Command barely glanced at the data. These humans had barely mastered interplanetary travel. They fought with crude projectile weapons and died from the smallest injuries. Their lifespans were laughably short, their bodies pathetically weak. It would be a simple harvest. The Zephyrians had faced warriors made of living metal, creatures that breathed plasma, and hive minds that spanned entire worlds. What threat could these fragile pink beings possibly pose? But in the cold depths of space, Marcus Chun floated silently in his combat suit, watching the massive Zephyrian dreadnought approach Earth's outer defense grid. His heart beat steadily in his chest, not with fear, but with the calm rhythm of a predator recognizing prey. The aliens had made their first mistake. They had confused gentleness with weakness, compassion with cowardice. They were about to learn why humanity had clawed its way from the caves to the stars, not through superior strength or advanced technology, but through something far more dangerous, the absolute refusal to surrender, even when surrender was the only logical choice. The war was about to begin, and the Zephyrians had no idea they had just declared war on the most dangerous species the galaxy had ever produced. The first time Commander Veltar of the Zephyrian Third Fleet saw a human, he laughed. It was a sound like crystal wind chimes caught in a storm, musical yet sharp enough to cut glass. The creature on his viewing screen was pathetically small, standing barely 2 meters tall, with skin the color of pale sand. Its body appeared to be made of nothing more substantial than water and protein, held together by the thinnest membrane. Most amusing of all, it had tiny droplets of salt water leaking from its optical sensors. This is what has the High Command concerned. Veltar asked his tactical officer, Zephlin. The massive crystalline being beside him shifted, his body catching and refracting the bridge's ambient light into dancing rainbows across the command deck. The intelligence reports indicate they call it crying. Commander, Zephlin replied, his voice carrying the harmonic resonance typical of their species. It appears to be some form of stress response. Their bodies literally leak when confronted with adversity. The human on screen was indeed crying. Marcus Chun stood in the observation deck of Luna Station, watching through reinforced transparent aluminum as the Zephyrian scouting fleet approached Earth's outer solar system. His daughter's voice echoed in his mind from their last conversation 3 days ago. She had asked him if the monsters from space were really coming, and he had told her not to worry, that Daddy would keep her safe. Now, watching the alien ships move with predatory grace through the asteroid belt, he wasn't sure he could keep that promise. But Marcus Chun had not survived 37 years of life, 15 years of military service, and the brutal mining wars of Europa by giving up when things looked impossible. The tears on his face were not tears of defeat. They were tears of fury. "Sir," came the voice of Lieutenant Sarakim through his comm unit. "Admiral Torres wants to see you in the briefing room. Priority Alpha." Marcus wiped his face with the back of his hand and turned away from the viewport. The Zephyrian ships were still hours away from Earth's orbital defense platforms, but he could already see their intent in the way they moved. These were not explorers or diplomats. These were conquerors. "On my way," he replied, his voice steady despite the storm of emotions raging inside him. The briefing room on Luna Station was a study in controlled panic. Admiral Elena Torres stood at the head of a holographic display table, her weathered face illuminated by the blue glow of tactical projections. Around her, 24 of Earth's best military minds studied the approaching alien fleet with expressions ranging from grim determination to barely concealed terror. "Ladies and gentlemen," Admiral Torres began as Marcus entered the room. "I'll keep this brief because we don't have time for lengthy speeches. Our long-range sensors have confirmed what we feared. The Zephyrian fleet consists of 12 dreadnoughts, 47 heavy cruisers, and over 200 fighter craft. Each of their dreadnoughts is roughly the size of Manhattan and capable of reducing a planet's surface to molten glass." A murmur ran through the assembled officers. Marcus took his seat at the table, his eyes never leaving the holographic representation of the enemy fleet. "Our intelligence suggests that Zephyrians are energy-based life forms housed in crystalline shells harder than diamond," Torres continued. "They've conquered 14 star systems in the past 50 years. Every world they've encountered has either surrendered or been completely destroyed. There are no records of successful resistance." Captain Janet Williams, commander of the Orbital Defense Grid, raised her hand. "What about our defensive capabilities, Admiral? The Mars shipyards have been working around the clock. Surely we have something." Torres manipulated the hologram, bringing up images of Earth's defensive fleet. "We have 8 destroyers, 3 heavy cruisers, and the new dreadnought Indomitable. Our total combined firepower is roughly equivalent to one of their smaller vessels." The silence that followed was deafening. Marcus watched as hope died in the eyes of his fellow officers. But where they saw impossibility, he saw opportunity. The aliens had made their first critical error. They had assumed that technological superiority guaranteed victory. "Admiral," Marcus said, standing slowly. "Permission to speak freely." "Granted, Commander. Has anyone considered that maybe our weakness is actually our strength?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Several officers turned to look at him with expressions of confusion or annoyance. "Explain," Torres said. Marcus walked to the holographic display, studying the alien ship configurations. "Look at their formation. Perfect symmetry, optimal firing patterns, maximum efficiency. Everything calculated to the last decimal point. They fight like a computer program." He gestured to the Earth fleet arrangement, which looked chaotic by comparison. "Now look at us. Irregular spacing, mixed vessel types, no apparent tactical doctrine. To them, we probably look like we don't know what we're doing." "We don't know what we're doing," muttered Commander Rodriguez from the back of the room. "We're barely a Type 1 civilization trying to fight a Type 3. "Exactly," Marcus said, his voice gaining strength. "They expect us to fight like them. Calculated, logical, efficient. But what if we don't? What if we fight like what we are? And what are we?" Torres asked, though Marcus could see a spark of understanding beginning to grow in her eyes. "Crazy," Marcus said simply. "We're a species that evolved on a death world where everything from the weather to the wildlife try to kill us daily. We're a species that invented warfare not as a tool of conquest, but as a means of survival. We're a species that has never, in our entire history, faced a fight we couldn't find a way to win." He turned to face the room, his eyes blazing with conviction. "They've studied our technology, our weapons, our ships, but they haven't studied us. They don't understand what it means to be human." Lieutenant Commander Park, the fleet's chief tactical officer, frowned. "Commander Chun, what exactly are you proposing?" Marcus smiled, and there was something in that expression that made several officers unconsciously lean back in their chairs. "I'm proposing we teach them." Over the next hour, Marcus outlined his plan. It was insane, reckless, and violated every principle of space combat doctrine ever written. It involved splitting their already inferior fleet into even smaller groups, deliberately exposing their weaknesses, and engaging in tactics that would be considered war crimes if committed against humans. "You want to use our mining charges as weapons?" Captain Williams asked, incredulous. "Industrial mining charges are designed to crack asteroids," Marcus explained. "They don't care about shields or armor. They just make really big explosions. But they're not guided munitions. We'd have to get within a few hundred meters to use them effectively. Yes, that's suicide. Only if we miss. Admiral Torres listened to the objections, the fears, and the desperate alternatives proposed by her staff. Finally, she held up a hand for silence. Commander Chun, she said quietly, your plan has approximately a 12% chance of success according to our tactical computers. Yes, ma'am. Against any other species, I would court-martial you for even suggesting it. Marcus met her gaze steadily. But we're not fighting any other species. Torres was quiet for a long moment, studying the holographic display. The Zephyrian fleet continued its inexorable advance toward Earth, their formations perfect, their intentions clear. You're right, she said finally. We are crazy, and maybe that's exactly what we need to be. She turned to address the room. All fleet commanders will implement Chen's battle plan. We launch in 6 hours. As the briefing dissolved into frantic preparations, Marcus remained behind, staring at the tactical display. Somewhere out there, his daughter was sleeping in her bed on Earth, trusting that her father would keep her safe from the monsters. The Zephyrians had made the mistake of bringing those monsters to her world. They were about to learn that humans became monsters themselves when protecting what they loved. Meanwhile, aboard the Zephyrian flagship Eternal Radiance, Commander Veltar reviewed the human defensive positions with satisfaction. Their fleet was pathetically small and positioned in a way that guaranteed quick defeat. The humans had even split their forces, making victory even easier. Shall I signal the other commanders to prepare for planetary bombardment? Zephlin asked. Not yet, Veltar replied, his crystalline form pulsing with anticipation. I want to study their combat techniques first. It may provide useful data for future conquests. He had no way of knowing that Marcus Chun was counting on exactly that curiosity. The human commander understood something that the Zephyrians, for all their advanced technology and superior intellect, could never comprehend. Sometimes the best way to win a war was to let your enemy think they had already won. The trap was set. In a few hours, the aliens would learn their first lesson about humanity. Humans were at their most dangerous when they appeared to be defeated. The battle began exactly as the Zephyrians expected it would. The human fleet, arranged in what appeared to be a panicked defensive formation around Earth's orbital platforms, opened fire first. Their projectile weapons and primitive energy beams struck the crystalline shields of the alien vessels and dissipated harmlessly, like raindrops against a mountain. Commander Veltar observed the engagement from his command throne, his body refracting the bridge's light into pleased patterns of blue and gold. How quaint, he murmured to his tactical officer. They actually believe their weapons can penetrate our defenses. The human vessels were already beginning to scatter, their formations breaking apart under the methodical advance of the Zephyrian fleet. To Veltar's experienced eye, it looked like exactly what it was supposed to look like, a desperate retreat by an outmatched enemy. What he could not see was Marcus Chun, drifting silently in the shadow of a destroyed orbital platform, his small fighter craft powered down to minimal emissions. Around the solar system, 19 other human pilots waited in similar positions, hidden among debris fields, asteroid clusters, and the hulks of old mining equipment. Viper 2 to Viper Lead, came Sarah Kim's voice over the encrypted channel. Target package is in position. Marcus watched through his scope as the massive Zephyrian dreadnought Eternal Radiance moved into the exact position he had hoped it would. The alien commander was pursuing the fleeing human fleet, drawn forward by what appeared to be an easy victory. All Viper units, Marcus transmitted. Execute Phoenix Protocol on my mark. The Phoenix Protocol was Marcus's own creation, named after the mythological bird that rose from its own ashes. It was based on a simple principle. Sometimes you had to burn everything down to win. Mark, 20 human fighters suddenly powered up from their hidden positions, their engines flaring to life like newborn stars. But instead of engaging the enemy vessels in traditional combat, they did something no military doctrine in the galaxy had ever contemplated. They flew directly at the alien ships at maximum speed, their hulls packed with enough industrial explosives to crack open asteroids. Aboard the Eternal Radiance, Zephelin's crystalline form suddenly blazed with alarm patterns. Commander, energy signatures appearing throughout the system. Multiple small craft approaching at attack vectors. Veltar spun toward the tactical display, his perfect confidence wavering for the first time. Impossible. Our sensors detected no such vessels. They were powered down, sir, drifting dead in space. Our scanners classified them as debris. The first human fighter reached its target, a Zephyrian heavy cruiser called the Crystal Spear. Instead of firing weapons, the small craft simply rammed into the alien vessel's shield generators at 3,000 kilometers per hour. The mining charges detonated on impact, creating an explosion that lit up the vacuum of space like a miniature sun. When the light faded, the Crystal Spear was gone. Simply gone. Where a ship the size of a city block had been moments before, there was nothing but expanding plasma and twisted metal. By the infinite light, Veltar whispered, his form flickering between colors of shock and disbelief. They destroyed themselves. They actually destroyed themselves to damage one of our ships. He was not prepared for what happened next. The second wave of human fighters emerged from hiding, but these were not suicide ships. These were the survivors of the fleeing fleet, and they were now attacking from behind while the Zephyrians were still reeling from the kamikaze assault. Lieutenant Commander Park led this assault from the bridge of the destroyer Defiant. Her ship was barely a tenth the size of the smallest Zephyrian vessel, but she had something the aliens couldn't understand: 37 years of experience fighting in environments that would kill most other species. Target their sensor arrays, she ordered her weapons officer. They can't hit what they can't see. The Defiant danced through the Zephyrian formation like a shark among whales, its weapons focused on disabling rather than destroying. Each shot was precisely aimed at sensor clusters, communication arrays, and shield projectors. The aliens had superior firepower, but their weapons were designed for large-scale combat against similarly massive opponents. Trying to hit the small, agile human fighters was like trying to swat flies with sledgehammers. But it was what happened next that truly shocked the Zephyrian commander. Marcus Chun, his kamikaze run complete, ejected from his fighter just before impact and activated his personal combat suit's thrusters. Instead of floating helplessly in space waiting for rescue, he used his suit's magnetic grapples to attach to the hull of the Eternal Radiance itself. Veltar became aware of this development when his ship's internal sensors detected an unauthorized breach in the outer hull. Security alert, Zephelin announced. Intruder detected in Section 7. How is this possible? Our shields should prevent any boarding action. The intruder came with the kamikaze fighter, Veltar realized with growing horror. It ejected before impact and attached itself to our hull during the explosion. The shield disruption allowed it to penetrate our defenses. On his personal display, Veltar could see the intruder moving through the ship's maintenance corridors. It was the same human he had observed crying earlier, the one whose emotional breakdown had amused him so greatly. But this creature was not crying now. It moved through the ship with deadly purpose, using tools and weapons that seemed almost primitive compared to Zephyrian technology. What Veltar could not understand was how effective those primitive tools were proving to be. Marcus had spent 15 years working in the deep space mining operations around Europa, where a single mistake with industrial equipment could kill you instantly. He knew exactly which systems kept a ship operational, and, more importantly, he knew how to sabotage them with nothing more than plasma cutter and some creative thinking. The first thing he did was disable the internal gravity generators. Zephyrians, being energy-based life forms, were less affected by gravity changes than humans, but their equipment was not. Suddenly, coolant began floating freely through critical systems, and delicate crystalline components began stress fracturing under their own weight. The second thing he did was find the ship's main power distribution center. "Sir," Zephelin called out as the bridge lights flickered. "We're experiencing cascade failures throughout the ship." The intruder has accessed our primary systems. Veltar felt something he had never experienced before in 300 years of military service. Fear. Not just concern or tactical worry, but genuine primal terror. This single human was systematically disabling his flagship from the inside, using nothing more than maintenance tools, and an understanding of ship systems that shouldn't have been possible for such a primitive species. Send security teams to Section 7 immediately, he ordered. But Marcus was no longer in Section 7. He was moving through the ship's ventilation system, a network designed for Zephyrian body dimensions and never intended to be used for defense. The alien security teams, encased in their crystalline combat forms, could not fit through spaces that Marcus could navigate easily. It was like watching a virus infect a computer system, Veltar thought with growing panic. The human was too small, too adaptable, and too unpredictable for their countermeasures. Meanwhile, the space battle continued to evolve in ways that no Zephyrian tactical computer could have predicted. The human vessels that should have been destroyed or fleeing were instead regrouping and adapting their tactics in real time. Every time the aliens adjusted their formations to counter human strategies, the humans would completely change their approach. Captain Williams, commanding the orbital defense grid, had begun using the planet's own gravitational field as a weapon. By calculating precise trajectories, she was slingshotting damaged human ships around Earth's gravity well, giving them enough velocity to ram Zephyrian vessels even when their engines were failing. Commander Rodriguez had taken his heavy cruiser into the asteroid belt and was using mining drones as guided missiles, each one packed with enough explosives to damage alien shield generators. But perhaps most disturbing to Zephyrian sensibilities was the behavior of the human crews aboard damaged vessels. When their ships were crippled and boarding was imminent, they didn't surrender. Instead, they would overload their reactors and detonate their own ships, taking their attackers with them. This is madness, Veltar transmitted to his fleet commanders. They're fighting like wild animals. No tactical sense, no regard for their own survival, no concept of strategic withdrawal. Sir, came the reply from Commander Zithal aboard the piercing light. Perhaps we should consider tactical retreat until we can better understand their methods. Retreat. Veltar's form blazed with indignant colors. We are the Zephyrian Third Fleet. We have conquered star systems. We do not retreat from primitives. Even as he spoke, another of his cruisers was destroyed by a human fighter that had somehow managed to fly through its shield harmonics at precisely the right frequency to cause a resonance cascade. The pilot had been a former asteroid miner who had spent years studying crystalline formations for optimal extraction points. The humans were not fighting like a military force, Veltar realized. They were fighting like miners, engineers, and explorers who happened to have weapons. Every tactic they used was based on practical experience with dangerous environments and industrial equipment. They fought like people who had spent their entire lives solving impossible problems with inadequate resources. And then, Marcus Chun reached the ship's main reactor. The Zephyrian power core was a beautiful thing, a crystalline matrix that converted pure energy into usable power with nearly perfect efficiency. It was also, as Marcus discovered, remarkably similar to the quantum resonance chambers used in deep space mining operations. Sir, Zephelin's voice cracked with harmonics of pure panic. The intruder has reached the main reactor. He's interfacing with the control systems. Veltar watched in horror as his ship's most vital systems began shutting down one by one. But the human wasn't trying to destroy the reactor. He was reprogramming it. Marcus had realized that Zephyrian technology, for all its advancement, was based on the same fundamental principles as human technology, just executed with greater sophistication. The aliens had made their systems more efficient, more powerful, and more elegant, but they hadn't made them more secure. After all, who would be insane enough to board a ship during combat and attempt to hack its reactor with mining equipment? A human, as it turned out. As the Eternal Radiance's weapons powered down and its shields flickered, Veltar finally, understood what he was facing. These humans didn't fight like any other species because they weren't like any other species. They were insane by any reasonable definition, but their insanity was precisely calibrated for survival. They had evolved on a world that tried to kill them daily, so they had learned to turn any environment into a weapon. They had developed technology not for conquest or dominance, but for surviving in places where survival should have been impossible. And now they were applying that same adaptive insanity to warfare. The battle was far from over, but for the first time since entering this system, Commander Veltar began to suspect that his fleet might not be the apex predators he had believed them to be. The moment Marcus Chun successfully hijacked the Eternal Radiance's reactor core, everything changed. Not just for the flagship, but for the entire human fleet. The massive Zephyrian dreadnought, suddenly broadcasting on human communication frequencies and transmitting detailed information about alien ship configurations, became the key that unlocked tactical possibilities no one had imagined. All human vessels. Marcus transmitted from the captured reactor room, his voice carrying across the battle space with crystalline clarity thanks to Zephyrian communication technology. You now have complete technical specifications for their fleet. Their shield frequencies, their weapon patterns, their structural weak points. Everything. Admiral Torres, coordinating the battle from the bridge of the Indomitable, felt her heart skip a beat as data flooded her tactical displays. "My God," she whispered. "Marcus, how did you access their central database?" Turns out their security protocols assume any intruder would be another energy-based life form. Marcus replied, his fingers dancing across Zephyrian control interfaces that he was interpreting through pure mechanical intuition. They never considered that someone might brute force their systems using mining software and a complete disregard for safety protocols. But Marcus had done more than just steal their intelligence. He had turned their own flagship into a weapon against them. Commander Veltar watched in growing horror as his ship's weapon systems came online and began targeting his own fleet. But these are not random attacks. The human controlling his ship understood Zephyrian tactics better than some of his own officers, and was using that knowledge with devastating precision. "Sir," Zephlin reported, his crystalline form flickering with patterns of disbelief. "The Eternal Radiance is firing on the Stellar Harmony. Direct hit to their shield generators." "Return fire," Veltar commanded. "Sir, we cannot. The Eternal Radiance contains our fleet's tactical command center, our communication relay, and Admiral Kethmore himself. If we destroy it, we lose coordination for the entire battle group." Veltar realized with growing dread that the human had not simply captured his ship. He had captured the nerve center of the entire Zephyrian fleet. Every order, every tactical update, every piece of intelligence flowed through the Eternal Radiance. And now that flow was controlled by a single human with an apparent talent for chaos. What happened next violated every principle of space combat that Veltar had learned in 3 centuries of military service. Marcus began using the Eternal Radiance's tractor beams not to hold enemy ships, but to physically ram them into each other. The massive dreadnought, designed to serve as a mobile command platform, became a 2-kilometer-long battering ram guided by someone who had spent years moving asteroids with similar equipment. "This is impossible," Veltar transmitted to his remaining fleet. No tactical computer would attempt such maneuvers. The risk calculations alone should prevent any rational being from attempting close-quarters ramming with a command vessel. "Commander," came the reply from Captain Zephyra of the Crystal Storm, "I respectfully suggest that rationality may not be a factor we can count on." She was proven correct moments later when Marcus Chun did something that no military academy in the galaxy would have considered possible. He began using the captured dreadnought's own fighter bays to launch Zephyrian fighters against the Zephyrian fleet. The alien pilots, receiving launch orders that appeared to come from their own command structure, launched dutifully and proceeded to attack their own ships before realizing what was happening. By the time they understood the deception, human fighters had joined the engagement, and The space around Earth had become a three-dimensional maze of confused alien pilots trying to distinguish friends from enemies, while human pilots exploited every moment of that confusion. But perhaps the most disturbing development, from the Zephyrian perspective, was what happened when their boarding parties finally reached Marcus Chen's position. The first security team to breach the reactor room expected to face a desperate human making a final stand with primitive weapons. Instead, they found Marcus Chen sitting calmly at the main control console, having apparently learned to read Zephyrian technical displays in the past hour. Finally, Marcus said, looking up from his work, "I was wondering when you'd get here." The lead Zephyrian warrior, Kethlin, raised his energy weapon. "Surrender, human. You have nowhere to run." Marcus smiled, and that expression sent warning signals through every Zephyrian survival instinct. Who said anything about running? Before Kethlin could fire, Marcus activated a program he had been working on since taking control of the reactor. The gravity field in the reactor room suddenly reversed, slamming the Zephyrian security team against the ceiling with enough force to crack their crystalline armor. At the same time, the room's atmosphere vented, creating a windstorm that sent debris flying like shrapnel. But Marcus Chun, wearing a human combat suit designed for zero-gravity and mining operations, was completely unaffected. He launched himself across the room using magnetic grapples, landing among the disoriented aliens with a toolkit full of mining equipment that he proceeded to use with surgical precision. Kethlin discovered that humans had evolved something that Zephyrians lacked: the ability to fight effectively in chaotic, dangerous environments where any mistake could be fatal. Marcus moved through the zero-gravity, debris-filled space like he had been born in it, using the ship's own systems against its defenders. Security Team 7 to command, Kethlin managed to transmit before Marcus disabled his communication system with a plasma cutter. "Request immediate backup. The human has turned the reactor room into some kind of death trap." More security teams were dispatched, but they found that Marcus had done something no Zephyrian tactical manual had ever anticipated. He had turned the ship's own corridors into a maze of improvised traps and obstacles. Gravity fields that suddenly shifted direction, atmosphere locks that created explosive decompression, maintenance drones reprogrammed to attack intruders with industrial tools. Meanwhile, outside the ship, the space battle had evolved into something that no military historian would believe possible. The human fleet, now armed with complete intelligence about Zephyrian capabilities, had abandoned all conventional tactics in favor of what could only be described as controlled chaos. Ships that should have retreated instead performed impossible maneuvers, using gravitational slingshots and debris fields to accelerate beyond what their engines should have allowed. Captain Williams had discovered that Zephyrian shields, designed to deflect energy weapons and projectiles, were completely useless against clouds of metallic dust created by grinding up asteroids. Her mining ships were creating artificial nebulae that blinded alien sensors while providing cover for human fighters. Commander Rodriguez had begun using his ship's emergency life pods as guided missiles, each one carrying a mining charge and a volunteer pilot who would eject at the last moment. The Zephyrians, trained to avoid shooting escape pods by their own military ethics, were caught completely off guard by this tactic. But the most effective human strategy was also the most disturbing to alien sensibilities. They had begun deliberately damaging their own ships to create unpredictable flight patterns. Vessels with half their engines disabled moved in ways that no targeting computer could predict, while ships venting atmosphere used the escaping gas as improvised maneuvering thrusters. To the Zephyrians, who valued efficiency and logical precision above all else, watching humans fight was like watching a form of beautiful madness. Nothing they did made sense according to any rational tactical doctrine, yet it was devastatingly effective. "Sir," Zephlin reported to Veltar with growing panic, "we've lost 6 ships in the past hour. The humans are using tactics our computers cannot predict or counter." "What kind of tactics?" "Insane ones, sir. They're ramming us with their own damaged vessels, using their escape pods as weapons, and turning their engineering failures into tactical advantages. One of their ships lost its navigation system and has been flying in a random pattern for 20 minutes, but somehow that's made it impossible for our gunners to hit. Veltar studied the tactical display with growing horror. The human fleet should have been destroyed hours ago, yet they were not only surviving, but actually gaining the advantage. More disturbing still, they were learning and adapting faster than his own crews could develop countermeasures. "Sir," came an urgent transmission from the Radiant Spear. "The humans have begun boarding our ships." "What? How?" "Their vessels are too small to carry boarding craft." "They're not using boarding craft, sir. They're using individual soldiers in personal combat suits. They eject from their fighters just before ramming us, then attach to our hulls and cut their way inside." This was perhaps the most terrifying development yet. Zephyrian ships were designed to repel boarding by other Zephyrian forces, which meant large, obvious assault craft carrying dozens of crystalline warriors. The idea that individual humans could board capital ships using nothing more than personal equipment and determination had never been considered. And, once aboard, the humans fought like nothing the Zephyrians had ever encountered. Sergeant Maria Santos, formerly of the Europa Mining Consortium, had spent 12 years working in the most dangerous industrial environment humanity had ever created. She knew exactly how to move through hostile ships, how to use industrial equipment as weapons, and how to survive in places that were actively trying to kill her. When she breached the hull of the Zephyrian cruiser Infinite Dawn, she did not engage in a straightforward firefight with its defenders. Instead, she began systematically sabotaging critical systems while staying one step ahead of security teams. She used maintenance shafts, service corridors, and emergency passages that the aliens had never considered as tactical routes. More importantly, she understood that the best way to fight a superior force was to turn their own strength against them. Human Infiltrator in Engineering Section 4 came to report to the Infinite Dawn's captain. "She's compromised the life support system." But Maria had not damaged life support. She had improved it. The atmospheric processors that maintained perfect conditions for Zephyrian physiology were now flooding the ship with gases optimized for human breathing, creating an environment where her combat suit systems performed better while alien sensors struggled to function. As reports of similar infiltrations poured in from across the fleet, Commander Veltar began to understand that he was not fighting a conventional enemy. The humans were not trying to win through superior technology or tactics. They were trying to win by being better at survival than their opponents. And, terrifyingly, it was working. The Zephyrian Third Fleet, which had conquered 14 star systems without suffering a single defeat, was being systematically dismantled by a species that had barely achieved interplanetary flight. The worst part was that the humans seemed to be enjoying themselves. 3 hours into what was supposed to be a simple planetary conquest, Commander Veltar faced a reality that shattered everything he understood about warfare. Half his fleet was disabled or destroyed. His flagship was controlled by a single human who had somehow learned to operate Zephyrian technology better than trained officers. And his remaining ships were being systematically hunted by an enemy that fought like a force of nature rather than a military organization. But it was the communication he received from Admiral Keth Moore that truly changed everything. All fleet commanders came a transmission from what remained of the Zephyrian command structure. "We have received intelligence that changes our understanding of this engagement. The humans are not defending just one world. They are defending their breeding ground." Veltar's crystalline form flickered with confusion. "Clarify, Admiral. Earth is not simply their home world. It is where they raise their offspring. Every human on that planet represents genetic continuity for their entire species. We are not attacking a military target. We are attacking their children." The implications hit Veltar like a physical blow. In Zephyrian culture, as in most advanced civilizations, military conflicts were conducted between professional warriors, with clear distinctions between combatants and civilians. The idea of threatening an entire species' breeding population was not just tactically unsound. It was considered a war crime of the highest order. "Sir, Lin asked quietly. Does this change our operational parameters? Before Veltar could answer, Marcus Chen's voice came over the communication system, broadcast from the captured reactor room of the Eternal Radiance. Attention, Zephyrian fleet, Marcus said, his tone calm despite the chaos surrounding him. I've been listening to your communications, and I think there's something you need to understand. The bridge fell silent as every Zephyrian officer focused on the human's words. You're right that Earth is where we raise our children, Marcus continued. My daughter Anna is 8 years old. She likes to draw pictures of spaceships and dreams of visiting other planets someday. Yesterday, she asked me if the monsters from space were really coming to hurt her family. Marcus paused, and when he spoke again, his voice carried a weight that seemed to press against the ship's bulkheads. I told her not to worry. I told her that Daddy would keep her safe. But here's what you need to understand about humans. We don't just keep our children safe. We keep all children safe. Every human child on Earth represents not just our genetic future, but our promise to the next generation that we will leave them a better world than we found. Through the ship's internal sensors, Veltar could see Marcus Chun sitting calmly among the wreckage of his security teams, his human combat suit scarred but intact, his hands steady on the alien controls. So, when you threaten our children, Marcus said, you're not just declaring war on our military. You're declaring war on every parent, every teacher, every adult who has ever held a human child and promised to protect them. You're declaring war on our love, our hope, and our absolute refusal to let our children inherit a universe where they have to live in fear. The communication ended, but its impact echoed through the Zephyrian fleet. These beings, for all their technological advancement, had evolved in environments where offspring were either completely safe or completely doomed. They had no cultural framework for understanding what it meant to fight for the survival of children. But they were about to learn. Across the solar system, the human response began to escalate beyond anything the aliens had witnessed. Ships that had been fighting defensively suddenly went on the offensive, not with desperation, but with a focused intensity that bordered on supernatural. Captain Williams, commanding the orbital defense grid, received a transmission from her 7-year-old son on Luna Base. Mommy, are you going to stop the bad guys from hurting us? Her response was to override every safety protocol in the station's power grid and redirect all available energy to the defense platform's main weapons. The resulting energy discharge was 3 times beyond the system's rated capacity, but it struck the Zephyrian heavy cruiser Harmonic Blade with enough force to crack its crystalline hull in half. The power surge burned out half the station's systems, but Williams didn't care. Her son was safe, and that was all that mattered. Commander Rodriguez received a message from his daughter's school. Children singing songs they had learned about brave space pilots who protected Earth from monsters. His response was to ram his crippled heavy cruiser directly into the Zephyrian dreadnought's stellar dominance, taking both ships out in an explosion that lit up half the solar system. His crew, every one of them a parent or grandparent, stayed at their posts until the end, ensuring maximum damage to the enemy vessel. But it was what happened aboard the captured ships that truly demonstrated the difference between Zephyrian and human warfare. Sergeant Santos, who had been systematically sabotaging Zephyrian vessels for the past hour, received a video message from her daughter's dance recital. 5-year-old Isabella Santos, performing a routine about butterflies, completely unaware that her mother was fighting for her life in the depths of space. Santos watched the video while hanging upside down in a Zephyrian ventilation shaft, surrounded by alien security teams searching for her. When it ended, she looked down at the next group of Zephyrian warriors entering the corridor below her and smiled. You guys have no idea what you've walked into, she murmured, then dropped among them like a force of nature. The Zephyrian security teams were trained to fight other Zephyrians, beings who valued self-preservation, who fought with logical tactics, who would retreat when faced with superior odds. They had no defense against someone who fought with the focused fury of a mother protecting her child. Santos moved through their formation like a whirlwind, using their own weapons against them, turning their crystalline bodies into obstacles, transforming their perfectly planned assault into chaos. When she was finally cornered in the ship's main engineering section, she didn't surrender. Instead, she activated the ship's emergency beacon and broadcast a message on all frequencies. "This is Sergeant Maria Santos of the Earth Defense Force," she said, her voice carrying across the battlespace to both human and alien ships. "I'm about to destroy this vessel. To my daughter Isabella, Mommy loves you, and Mommy kept her promise. To any humans receiving this, they made the mistake of threatening our children. Make them pay for it." The Infinite Dawn's reactor core went critical 30 seconds later, taking out 2 more Zephyrian ships in the resulting explosion. But Santos was not the only human broadcasting final messages. Across the battle space, human pilots and soldiers who found themselves in impossible situations were making similar recordings. Not pleas for help or desperate goodbyes, but statements of absolute determination. "This is Lieutenant Commander Park. I've lost engine power and life support is failing, but I got a clear shot at their command ship. For Emma and Michael, Daddy's coming home after this is over. This is Captain Chun. My ship is done, but I've rigged the emergency pods with mining charges. For every human child who dreams of exploring the stars, we're going to make sure they have stars to explore. This is Flight Sergeant Kim. Ejecting in 3 seconds, then using my personal thrusters for a ramming run on their shield generator. Tell my son that space is beautiful, and he should never be afraid of it." The Zephyrian fleet was being destroyed not by superior technology or tactical brilliance, but by something they had never encountered before, an entire species fighting with the concentrated love and protective fury of parents defending their offspring. Commander Veltar, finally, understood what he was facing when he received a transmission from Marcus Chun that included video feeds from Earth's surface. Children playing in parks, families gathering for meals, schools full of young humans learning about science and mathematics and art. "This is what you're trying to destroy," Marcus said quietly. "Not military installations or strategic resources. Just children who want to grow up and build better worlds. Every human you're fighting out here is someone who has held one of these children and promised to keep them safe." Veltar looked around his bridge, at officers whose forms were flickering with patterns he had never seen before. Fear, yes, but something deeper, something that his species' advanced psychology had no name for. "Sir," Zephlin said quietly, "perhaps we should consider withdrawal. Our tactical objectives are no longer achievable." "We are the Zephyrian Third Fleet," Veltar replied automatically, but his voice lacked conviction. "We do not retreat. Sir, we have never fought an enemy like this. Our entire tactical doctrine assumes that our opponents value their own survival above their strategic objectives. These humans appear to value their offspring's survival above everything else, including their own lives." Veltar studied the tactical display, watching as another of his ships was destroyed by a human pilot who had somehow managed to ram it with nothing more than a personal fighter and industrial explosives. The pilot had transmitted children's laughter just before impact. "What kind of species fights this way?" he whispered. "Sir," came an urgent transmission from the surviving ships. "We have a problem. The humans have stopped trying to destroy us." "Explain." "They're trying to capture us. The remaining human forces are using non-lethal tactics, disabling our weapons, boarding our ships with the apparent intent to take prisoners rather than kill us." Veltar felt a chill that had nothing to do with the ship's temperature controls. Why would they want to take prisoners? The answer came from Marcus Chun, whose understanding of Zephyrian technology had apparently advanced to the point where he could monitor their communications in real time. Because, Marcus said, "We want to make sure you survive to tell other species what happens when someone threatens human children. We want you to go home and explain to your people that there are certain things in this universe that are sacred and certain lines that must never be crossed. And if someone does cross those lines?" Veltar asked, though he dreaded the answer. "Then they discover what happens when love becomes a weapon. Marcus replied. And they learned that the most dangerous predator in the galaxy is not the one with the biggest claws or the strongest armor. It's the one that fights not for conquest or glory, but for the simple right of their children to exist. The battle was nearly over, but its implications were just beginning. The Zephyrian Third Fleet had come to Earth expecting easy conquest. Instead, they had discovered that humanity possessed something more dangerous than any weapon: the absolute unwillingness to allow their children to grow up in a universe where love could not triumph over fear. They were about to become the first alien species to learn that lesson and survive to share it. 6 months after the Battle of Sol, Commander Veltar stood before the Zephyrian High Council in the crystal halls of their homeworld, his form a muted pattern of subdued colors that spoke of profound change. The being who had approached Earth with confidence and superiority now carried himself with the careful demeanor of someone who had seen the universe reveal terrible new truths. "Counselors," he began, his harmonic voice echoing through the chamber, "I must report that our assumptions about human capabilities were not merely incorrect. They were catastrophically inadequate." The 12 members of the High Council shifted in their crystalline thrones, patterns of skepticism and impatience flickering across their bodies. Counselor Zethare, the eldest among them, spoke first. "You're saying that a species that has barely achieved interplanetary flight defeated the Third Fleet?" "No, Counselor," Veltar replied. "I'm saying that a species that has barely achieved interplanetary flight taught us what it means to fight for something more important than victory." He activated the chamber's holographic display system, filling the air above them with recordings from the battle. The council watched in growing disbelief as human fighters performed impossible maneuvers, as individual soldiers boarded capital ships with nothing more than mining equipment, as pilots flew directly into enemy formations with weapons that should never have posed a threat to Zephyrian technology. "This is madness," Counselor Neftin observed. "No rational species would employ such tactics. The casualties alone should have forced them to surrender." "That is precisely the point," Veltar said quietly. "Humans do not fight rationally. They fight emotionally. And their primary emotion during combat is not fear for their own survival, but love for those they protect." He changed the display to show recordings from Earth itself. Children playing, families gathering, schools full of young humans learning about art and science. The council fell silent as they realized what they were seeing. "Every human we faced in combat was connected to this," Veltar explained. "They were not professional soldiers fighting for abstract, strategic objectives. They were parents, siblings, friends, and guardians fighting to ensure that these children would survive to inherit the universe." Counselor Kethwa leaned forward, her form flickering with patterns of unease. "You are suggesting that their entire species possesses some form of enhanced parental instinct that extends beyond their immediate offspring?" "I'm suggesting that humans have weaponized love itself," Veltar replied. "And they have done so with efficiency that makes our military technology appear primitive by comparison." The chamber fell silent as the implications of this statement settled over the council. In Zephyrian culture, as in most advanced civilizations, military conflicts were conducted by specialists according to logical principles. The idea that an entire species could function as a collective protective organism was unprecedented. "Sir," came a voice from the chamber's communications system, "we have an incoming transmission from the Sol system." The sender identifies himself as Marcus Chun, speaking on behalf of the Earth Defense Force. Veltar's form immediately shifted to patterns of recognition and, surprisingly, something that might have been respect. "Put him through." The holographic display shifted to show Marcus Chun standing in what appeared to be the command center of a human space station. He looked older than he had during the battle, his face carrying new lines of weariness, but his eyes held the same steady determination that had made him so dangerous. "Counselors," Marcus said, inclining his head in a gesture that might have been respectful if not for the obvious steel beneath it, I wanted to personally thank you for an educational experience. Educational. Counselor Zethar asked. Your attack taught us several important things about galactic politics, Marcus replied. First, that there are species out there who consider planetary bombardment an acceptable opening gambit in first contact situations. Second, that our defensive capabilities, while adequate for survival, are insufficient for the protection of other worlds that might face similar threats. The display shifted to show images that made several council members recoil in shock. Human ships, but not the small, cobbled-together vessels they had faced during the battle. These were massive constructions, clearly built with Zephyrian technology, but incorporating design principles that no alien engineer would have considered. What you're looking at, Marcus continued, is the first generation of human warships constructed using the technical specifications we acquired during your visit. We've been busy over the past 6 months. The ships were beautiful in a way that spoke to human aesthetics. Sleek lines combined with obvious functionality, elegant curves that somehow suggested both speed and durability. But what made them truly terrifying was their size. The smallest vessels in the displayed fleet were larger than the Zephyrian dreadnoughts. We've also been talking to other species, Marcus said. The Altarians were quite interested to learn about your conquest of their colony worlds. The Vegan Confederacy had some pointed questions about what happened to their merchant fleets in the Proxima sector, and the Andromedan Collective was fascinated by our recordings of your tactical doctrines. Council and F-10's form blazed with alarm patterns. You have made contact with other species? We have made contact with other species who have reason to be concerned about Zephyrian expansion, Marcus corrected. It turns out that when you've been conquering 14 star systems, you make a lot of enemies. We've been comparing notes. The implications were staggering. The Zephyrian Empire had built its expansion on the assumption that conquered species were either destroyed or completely subjugated. The idea that humans could serve as a rallying point for resistance movements had never been considered. What do you want? Veltar asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. We want what we've always wanted, Marcus replied. Safety for our children, and the right to explore the universe without fear. But now we also want something else, assurance that no other species will face what you try to do to us. The display shifted again, showing star charts that encompassed most of the local galactic arm. Human territory was marked in blue, but it was no longer limited to the Sol system. Dozens of worlds were now tagged with human symbols, and the network of connections between them suggested an alliance that spanned hundreds of light years. This is the Human Defense Coalition, Marcus explained. 43 species who have decided that the galaxy needs an alternative to conquest and subjugation. We offer protection to worlds that cannot protect themselves, technological sharing between species with complementary capabilities, and collective defense against empires that consider genocide an acceptable tool of expansion. And what if we refuse to recognize this coalition? Counselor Zethar asked. Marcus smiled, and that expression carried the same dangerous calm that had made him so effective during the battle. Then, you will discover what happens when humans have 6 months to prepare for a fight instead of 6 hours. The holographic display showed detailed specifications for human weapons systems that had been reverse-engineered from Zephyrian technology and then improved beyond anything the aliens had imagined possible. Plasma cannons that could crack planetary crusts, shield systems that could deflect stellar flares, and, most disturbing of all, manufacturing capabilities that could construct fleets faster than they could be destroyed. Humans, as it turns out, Marcus continued, are very good at learning from their mistakes. The mistake we made 6 months ago was assuming that the universe was fundamentally peaceful and that rational species would resolve disputes through negotiation. You taught us otherwise. So we learned to build better ships, develop better weapons, and create better alliances. But most importantly, we learned to be proactive rather than reactive. The next species that threatens human children won't get as far as the asteroid belt. Commander Veltar watched the display with something approaching admiration. In 6 months, The humans had transformed themselves from a barely space-capable species into a galactic power that posed a genuine threat to Zephyrian hegemony. They had done so not through superior technology or ancient wisdom, but through the same adaptive insanity that had made them so dangerous during the battle. "What are your terms?" Counselor HFY asked. "Simple," Marcus replied. "Recognition of the Human Defense Coalition as a sovereign political entity. Withdrawal from all currently occupied worlds whose populations wish to join the coalition. And formal agreement that attacks on civilian populations will be considered acts of war against the entire coalition. And if we agree to these terms, then we become trading partners instead of enemies. Human industrial capacity is considerable when we're not using it to build weapons. We're quite good at terraforming, resource extraction, and technological innovation. There's no reason we can't coexist peacefully." The council exchanged glances, their forms flickering with patterns of discussion that occurred too rapidly for human perception. Finally, Counselor Zethra spoke. "These terms are acceptable." Marcus nodded. "Excellent. Oh, one more thing." His expression grew serious. "Commandeur Veltar." Veltar's form shifted with surprise. "Yes. Thank you." "For what?" "For teaching us that the universe is more dangerous than we realized. Your attack forced us to become stronger, to build better defenses, to form alliances we wouldn't have considered otherwise. In trying to destroy us, you made us into exactly what the galaxy needed us to become." Marcus paused, then added with that same dangerous smile, "We also wanted you to know that the next time you see humans in combat, you'll be fighting alongside us instead of against us. Because despite everything that happened, we've decided that the galaxy is big enough for all of us." The transmission ended, leaving the Zephyrian High Council in contemplative silence. They had begun the day as the masters of their corner of the galaxy. They were ending it as junior partners in a coalition led by a species they had attempted to annihilate. Commander Veltar reviewed the events of the past 6 months and realized that the humans had done something unprecedented in galactic history. They had turned their greatest vulnerability into their greatest strength. Their love for their children had made them willing to fight with suicidal intensity. Their technological inexperience had made them creative and unpredictable. Their lack of military tradition had freed them from the tactical assumptions that limited other species. Most importantly, their refusal to accept that conquest was inevitable had inspired other species to believe that alternatives were possible. "Sir," Zephlin asked quietly, "what are your orders?" Veltar studied the star charts showing the expanding influence of the Human Defense Coalition and made a decision that would have seemed impossible 6 months earlier. "Signal the fleet," he said. "We're going to contact the Coalition's nearest representative and apply for associate membership." "Sir, we may have created the most dangerous alliance in galactic history," Veltar observed. "I'd rather be part of it than face it as an enemy." As reports came in from across Zephyrian space, describing similar decisions by other military commanders, it became clear that the Battle of Sol had changed more than just the balance of power in one small system. It had fundamentally altered the nature of interstellar relations. For the first time in galactic history, love had proven more powerful than fear. And somewhere in the Sol system, 8-year-old Anna-Chun looked up at the stars through her bedroom window and dreamed of visiting alien worlds where children of every species could play together under foreign suns, protected by parents who understood that some things were worth fighting for, no matter how impossible the odds might seem. The galaxy had become a safer place for children to inherit. And that, Marcus realized as he watched his daughter sleep, was the only victory that truly mattered.